There are a vast amount of gacha games and mobile games in general that you could be playing potentially. And if you've been following along this channel for any period of time, you know that the main ones I tend to focus on are Arknights and Blue Archive. But I want to discuss what makes each of them good, but also as a whole, what makes them so approachable, and if or what, I suppose, would make a good first gacha game. Because I feel like overall the perception of gachas and the perception of mobile games is pretty bad, let's be honest here. But if we're talking about introductions, some do a much better job than others, and I think the last thing you would arbitrarily want is for an individual to play a game, have a bad first experience, just kind of write off the whole genre. I will only be discussing Arknights, Blue Archive, and Genshin Impact. I will briefly go over Tower of Fantasy, I will briefly go over Honkai Impact and PGR, as well as games like Azure Lane and Fate Go. But I won't delve too heavily into them simply because I haven't played enough to feel comfortable focusing on them for the duration of this video. With that being said, subscribe if you're interested and you enjoy this content, and let's move into it. I think something very important to consider is what you are looking for with different games. I think if you're looking for a fully fledged game that feels the most like a standard video game, I would recommend Genshin. Despite how much I don't cover Genshin and despite how rarely I mention it, I do believe it is the most solid experience for a vast majority of newer players or newer individuals to the genre. Genshin has the largest available resource of guides. If you don't know what an item is, or what a weapon does, or what the effects are, or how to build a character, or how to unlock and finish a mission or quest, you can just Google it on YouTube, on just Google outright, and there's probably guides online. There's a wealth of knowledge for that game, and it makes it so accessible for new players that other communities can't exactly compete. Not only that, but in the early stages, Genshin Impact has the most fully fledged experience because you're going through cutscenes and quests and stories and learning about all these characters, and you have the banners which tie into the events. The game keeps you pretty involved despite how much people rag on it. I've mentioned previously that I think Genshin Impact has a bad community. But I also think that Genshin Impact, due to being the largest community, is going to have the largest negative side. I think to compare the size of Genshin Impact and the size of its negative community to something like Arknights and Blue Archive is unfair because Blue Archive is the smallest out of any of these. Genshin is massive. I mean, let's be honest here, it's the most well-known and popular gacha, even if it's not the oldest. Genshin gets a lot of hate, but a lot of that's from individuals who don't play the game, and that brings down perception of it. It's a legitimately good experience. I personally say if you are an individual, or if someone were an individual who hadn't played any other gacha game, but had the ability to on any console, Genshin Impact would be the best one just because it's the most accessible. A PC client that actually works, has good graphical settings and controller bindings and PC keyboard bindings, so you could swap between them if you want. You have the consoles on Xbox and PlayStation. You have the mobile client for Android or iOS. I think it's the most accessible. The only limitation that you really could face is space because it's a giant game. But I think it's the most fully fledged experience, and I personally would recommend playing that over a game like Arknights and Blue Archive if you've never played a gacha before and if you aren't or don't know exactly what to expect. And if we're talking about the others between Arknights and Blue Archive, I'd honestly say maybe it just depends on what you would prefer. And I hate giving that answer because I think it's pretty important to just clarify and give a solid numerical ranking or a solid answer for questions. But I think with Blue Archive and Arknights, it can vary drastically based on what you're looking for in waifu or husbando, what type of story you want. I've said numerous times, I think Arknights doesn't necessarily have the best presentation for its story. The OSTs are nice, the character designs are nice, everything else is nice, but I don't think the presentation is the best for how it gets you into it or how it gives you the option. In the early tutorials, it takes forever because the game holds your hand for the first couple stages. And that seems nice, but if you've done it, I mean, for multiple times or for a while, you do kind of know that it does get a bit stale because it takes control away from you. It doesn't necessarily give you the option to explore around because a lot of it's locked behind completing certain stages. Keep in mind they're all early stages, but still, it's there. Compared to Blue Archive, which shoves the story to the side unless you want to do it later. You have the option of saying, okay, I want to spend all my current stamina on missions to upgrade my characters, and then you can go read the story after. And the same thing goes for relationship storylines. Arknights doesn't necessarily have that, and it feels like it makes it a bit... The barrier for entry into Arknights, in my opinion at least, is a bit higher. I think that's also amplified by the fact that if you're an individual who's used to much more fast-paced and action-packed gameplay, Arknights is a lot of waiting, because once you put your units down, you can kind of wait, unless you're activating skills. Where I think with Blue Archive, the characters are actively moving on screen, so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on, even if you can't actively control them. And with Genshin Impact, you are directly controlling them. It's very difficult to discuss the gameplay because depending on what you like, each one of these has a different style. Genshin Impact is a much more traditional sense in that you are controlling the characters, their skills, their ultimates, and subsequently can switch out between them. You have a party of individuals that you can kind of decide based on who you have, and you can gear them up depending on what you have and what you're going for. There are different stats. It's much more of an RPG because you have so many different stats going on. Energy recharge, your elemental damage bonus, your attack, your defense, your elemental mastery as well. You also need to consider HP depending on what the unit scales with that, and so on. You also have the weapon stats, and you also have the artifact system and the artifact bonuses. But even though I said all of that, and a lot of it's RNG dependent, Genshin once again has the best introduction to that with its community. Whereas with Arknights, you can kind of be left feeling around for a bit, wondering what you're supposed to do next. And there are a few individuals that I've met who don't necessarily know what they're supposed to do. And this can apply to any game. I'm not saying Arknights is the only one, but I think that Arknights, despite its tutorial, does kind of leave you waiting because you don't know who to build, because you don't necessarily get a proper introduction to what each unit does. The other stages are easy, and that's no surprise at the early stages, but the game is so easy in those early stages that it doesn't require you to really put down a defender. You don't really understand what specialists do until much later on, and they're so varied that you don't necessarily ever get a full picture on if you should build them or not. And some operators are meh and average and bad, but you have to build them to a certain point to get access to different skills which make them amazing. And it's very difficult to tell a new person, hey, this operator you just got is awful, but you should build them because later on, once you get the ability to, a different skill they have is great. And I think that can create an issue in which individuals don't necessarily know how to spend their resources. Like if you were to create an Arknights account right now, sure, you have the banner that they have, which essentially just allows you to summon from a small pool of individuals with a decreased price. But you also have the tickets, the operator tickets that it gives you as a result of, I think, one of the events of the anniversary. And if you're a new player, you might not know how or who's the best to get. And sure, you have information on that, but I don't think it necessarily is something that a lot of individuals consider. And I think even after that, let's say you get a solid start, you don't know who to build. And this is worse in Blue Archive because the community is so small, you don't necessarily have as many guides out there. But I do think that Blue Archive doesn't necessarily do a worse job of doing it, not a better job, but a worse job. And I think that if you're talking about what's overwhelming, Arknights gives you a lot and explains some. And you might be left wondering what to do with the others until later on when the game explains more. Whereas Blue Archive gives you everything, and a lot of those mechanics just kind of work their way out. An example is the game tells you here's how to start a mission, here's how to build up a character, and develop the skills. Here's how to summon. Those are 3 things, and if you click throughout the menus and over time you unlock different things, here's what a lesson does. Here's what the cafe does later on. Here's what crafting does, which nobody really understands half the time. And each of these concepts are introduced when you decide to click on them, and you can unlock them, and the game tells you you've unlocked this, but you don't and are not forced to go into there, which Arknights does kind of pull you away to do something. Hey, build up your base. We're going to show you. We're going to take you out of your gameplay right now and show you. And I think that does kind of create an issue in that the character or individual players kind of feel a bit disconnected from the experience going on. But that's just me. Tower of Fantasy, I played the game, and I quite like the game, but I will be honest, the story after killing off a character that was supposed to, I suppose, be important to me in the first 15 minutes, didn't really pull me in. But I'm going to give a solid opinion later on. With Azur, I just pulled because I think the character's cute. I'm going to be very honest with you. But that's the way you should play any gacha game. Pull for who you think is cute. Pull for who you like and who you find fun. Let's be honest, if the meta doesn't necessarily matter as much as people want to believe it does, yeah, it's fine to summon for meta units, but realistically, the only thing you're doing is accomplishing your own goals because no one else really gives a damn how well you clear content. And if that makes you happy, if clearing content faster makes you happy, by all means. But if it doesn't, then don't tell people that it should. At the end of the day, pull for who you want, pull for who you think is cute, and that's how you should play every game. Play for you, not for other people. Either way, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe, leave a like down below, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.